Good evening. My name is Naomi Sokoloff. As chair of the Jewish Studies program in the Jackson School of International Studies, I have the privilege of welcoming you to the 25th Annual Samuel and Althea Strom Lecture Series. Over the past 2.5 decades, this internationally acclaimed lecture series has brought to the University of Washington some of the most distinguished figures in contemporary Jewish studies. To mention just a few, our list of speakers has included Irving Howe, Yehuda Bauer, Samuel Heilman, Ruth Weiss, Paula Hyman, and Alan Mintz. The topics of the lectures have ranged from ancient to modern, from sociology to history to literature, film, philosophy, and religion. In their published form, under the sponsorship of the UW Press, the lectures have won 2 National Jewish Book Awards and have helped earn the University of Washington its national and international reputation for excellence in Jewish studies. On the occasion of this 25th anniversary, the press and the UW bookstore have arranged a special display of Strom lecture books for us. I hope you all saw some of the books on your way in. The display will also be across the hall in the Walker Ames room after tonight's lecture. These books bring the lectures to a wide audience beyond the walls of this building, and they have proven very valuable for scholars, for general readers, and for students. Indeed, one of our faculty members, Martin Jaffe, who is the Samuel and Althea Strom Professor of Jewish Studies, is currently redesigning one of our core courses, structuring the new syllabus around books from this lecture series. The Jews in Western Civilization is an introductory course that draws a broad range of students and is required for all majors and minors in our program. The Strom lecture books, because of their quality and because they cover such a rich array of topics, constitute an exceptional resource and a unique publication series with which to introduce Jewish studies to a new generation of students. Altogether, this endeavor is an excellent example of ways in which 3 primary missions of the university, scholarship, teaching, and community engagement, can be mutually enhancing activities that lead us from strength to strength. We stand then at a milestone, looking back and taking stock of 25 years of accomplishment, as we also look forward toward the future. Tonight, further directing our attention to matters of continuity and change, the Strom lectures for the year 2000 turn to the topic, Studying the Jewish Future. It seems especially fitting that they do so in a year of census taking, a time when, in both Jewish communities and in the broader society, Americans are assessing how far they have come and considering what lies ahead. It should be noted, too, that the lecture series this year coincides with a season of commemoration, beginning this week with Holocaust Remembrance Day and continuing next week with Israel's Memorial Day and Independence Day. These occasions give us pause, both for remembrance and for reflection on how to meet and shape the future. Our speaker this year is Calvin Goldscheider, Professor of Sociology and de Rote Professor of Judaic Studies at Brown University. Professor Goldscheider is a very distinguished sociologist who has published widely on demography, family issues, and Jewish community. He has examined ethnicity and nation building in comparative and historical perspectives, addressing questions about how ethnic and religious groups are formed and what happens over time to them and their communities. He uses a variety of perspectives to examine these issues in the United States, Europe, and the Middle East. These issues connect to his interests in questions of social change and social cultural diversity, and the examination of the contexts that shape people's lives and values. He has also carried out research on the transition to adulthood and on the nature of religion and family values in modern American society and in the State of Israel. Among his many books are such titles as The Population of Israel, The Transformation of the Jews, Jewish Continuity and Change, Emerging Patterns in America, and Israel's Changing Society, Population, Ethnicity, and Development. I'm very pleased to welcome Professor Goldscheider to the University of Washington. The next lecture in the series on Wednesday night will be on the centrality of Jewish values in shaping the Jewish future. The concluding lecture, Secularism, Religion, Ethnicity, and Assimilation, will take place next Monday, May 8th. I hope to see you back here again on both occasions. It will also be possible to see the lectures on UWTV, Channel 27. When we learn the exact dates of the broadcasts, we'll be sure to put that information on our website and also post it to our mailing lists. Let me mention also that tomorrow afternoon at 3:30, Professor Goldscheider will present a colloquium in Thompson Hall 317 on the topic Forecasting Jewish Population Futures, Lessons from Demography and History. Tonight, after the lecture and questions, we invite you to join us in the Walker Ames room for the book display and for a reception in honor of Professor Goldscheider. This reception is hosted by Sam and Althea Strom, the generous patrons of this lecture series. I want to express our thanks to them, to Professor Goldscheider, to you, the audience without which these lectures would not take place. And I notice in our audience tonight also is David Hodge, Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, so let me take this opportunity also to thank him for his support of Jewish studies at the University of Washington. Without further ado, let us turn to the lecture for tonight. The topic is The Future of Contemporary Jewish Communities, Israel, America, and Europe.
Thank you very much. What can we expect for Jewish communities during the next few decades? Expectations are thoughts about the future. And we study the future because we're curious about it and because it tells us what we can do now to be prepared for it, to shape it, and to change it. Thinking about the future allows us to try and make sure that the future, or some parts of the future we envision, does not come about. The best way to proceed, and not to be a short-term prophet of the future, is to understand the present. Our systematic understanding of the present provides us with a stronger basis for interpreting the past and foreseeing future possibilities. So let's take some time to review the contemporary Jewish communities in America, in Europe, and in Israel as a basis for thinking about the next decades, and as a corrective to some of the romanticized and ideologically driven conceptions of past history. We start with America. Jews in America are surviving. Indeed, some communities are thriving. Contemporary American Jewish communities have resources, money, education, health and talent, organizations and institutions on a scale unprecedented in historical memory. The survival of American Jews is less threatened by external forces than ever before. Most Jews in most Jewish communities in the United States have found unparalleled freedom and choice. And the amazing fact of our day is that when confronted with freedom and choice, most Jews choose to be Jewish rather than something else. Half a century ago, who would have thought that Jews in America would be the most organized, institution-oriented, ethnic religious group in the United States? Certainly the wealthiest, most educated ever in America, probably in the world, probably ever in Jewish history. Just a generation ago, who would have believed that Jewish students would be enrolled voluntarily in regular courses in Jewish subjects in almost 300 American colleges and universities, that almost all American Jewish children would be exposed to some form of Jewish education, that tens of thousands would be studying in a wide range of Hebrew day schools, and that more American students would be studying in yeshivot with American-educated rabbis and teachers than anywhere at any time. Did anyone foresee 3 decades ago that American Jews would share an almost universal consensus about the importance of the State of Israel in their lives, and that American Jewish survival itself would be an organizing value shaping the communal agenda? Shared lifestyles, common background, similar educational levels, common culture, and agreed-upon goals about Israel and communal survival, extensive and diverse institutions and organizations cement the religious and ethnic distinctiveness of American Jews. 100 years ago, the threats of pogroms and disenfranchisement of black of blocked economic opportunity and discrimination, of anti-Semitism and race hatred, of immigration, uprootedness and foreignness, of poverty and financial uncertainty, of political revolution and displacement were central features of most Jewish communities in the world. Scattered, unorganized, stateless, and powerless, pressured by poverty, excluded by Christian culture and church politics, ruptured by the upheavals of industrialization and urbanization, Jews a century ago thought they were the last surviving generation. They were not. We are witnesses to our own continuity as a community and as a people. The notion that Jews are in the process of decline, that their communities are disintegrating, are powerful myths, but poor and distorted descriptions of the reality of American Jewish life. We may be the ever-dying Jewish people. Each generation in Jewish history sees itself as the last, from the ancient prophets to some historians and Federation executives. It is a powerful story that may motivate some people and institutions to save the dying remnants or give up on America, but it is not a description of reality. I think it is often destructive and distorting, a poor basis for policy, and not consistent with the themes of renewal and constructive appraisal associated with the fundamentals of Judaism and Jewish culture. It is, I submit, poor social science and ideologically driven history. For our generation, both the ashes of a destroyed 6 million Jews of Europe and the sparks that reignited Jewish political control of the State of Israel provide memory and anchors of identity to Jews and their communities everywhere. But what are the internal dynamics that make survival as an American Jewish community worthwhile and desirable? It's not a question of whether American Jews will survive. There is every indication that they will. The question is, what will be the quality of their Jewish life, and what will they transmit to the next generation? In part, for American Jews, the question becomes, where do Jews fit with the emerging multicultural ethnic communities in America? Refocusing on the question of quality may sound a little strange and exaggerated. Haven't we been told repeatedly about the rapid demographic decline of our communities? Haven't we read reports about the assimilation of American Jews and the erosion of Jewish communities? Haven't we been presented with the highlights from the National Jewish Population Study that emphasize the unprecedented high intermarriage rates that threaten the survival of the Jewish community? Haven't we experienced intermarriage directly of our families, our children, and our friends? The numbers seem to convey that our younger generation isn't getting married, or marrying too late to have children of their own, or marrying those who are not born Jewish, and then they get divorced in record numbers. Indeed, who hasn't heard of deteriorating Jewish family values? Haven't we as well been embarrassed often by our own Jewish ignorance, usually when a non-Jewish friend, colleague, or neighbor asks us to explain something that we can't? Don't we hear regularly about our declining religious ritual observances and poor synagogue and temple attendance? Indeed, haven't we often questioned ourselves about the why of Jewish survival? Maybe there won't be any Jews left in the next generation to even talk about the quality of American Jewish life. Reading Jewish newspapers and periodicals would reveal the problems that recent studies have identified, what has been called the severe crisis of our sinking American Jewish community. One of my favorites was on the front page of the Sunday edition of the New York Times a few years ago, focusing on the Jewish intermarried and pointing to the conflict over their incorporation in the American Jewish community. In a paragraph entitled, "Jewish Population Steadily Declining," the article noted that the American Jewish population has been, quote, steadily eroding from within, although in fine print, the text reports that Jewish population growth was 2%. How any population growth turns into steady decline and erosion is one of those Jewish miracles that cannot be explained. But ask our rabbis and Jewish educators, our communal leaders and organizational executives. The quality of Jewish life seems so clearly to be declining. Our communities are eroding, so they say, and they seem to have the numbers to back them up. Here's what a Jewish historian wrote a few years ago in a book on the history of the Jews, and this is an eminent historian who teaches at one of the Eastern universities of the United States, and I quote, "In the case of Jews, the population trends signal the approaching end of Jewish history. 85% of Jews in America who are not Orthodox are on a one-way ticket to disappearance as an ethnic solidarity. This distinctive Jewish identity is running out as the largest, most affluent, and indeed vibrant Jewish community is demographically disappearing, not only through assimilation, the pathological breakdown of family life, and failure to reproduce at replacement levels, but through the racial suicide of a runaway rate of intermarriage. The Jewish people as a whole, as an ethnic entity, he says, is threatened with erosion and communal extinction." And he adds, "What the Holocaust began physically will in the 21st century be accomplished culturally." Another review, less than 2 years ago, concludes the same, written by a journalist reviewing all the studies about American Jews, and he concludes as follows, and here again I quote, "The American Jewish population is headed for catastrophic decline. He predicts that half of the American Jews will disappear in 2 generations due to intermarriage and fertility levels, and combined," he said, and here I quote, "You start with 100 American Jews, you end up with 60. In 1 generation, more than a third have disappeared, and in just 2 generations, 2 out of every 3 will vanish." You may not remember, but in 1964, Look magazine predicted the disappearance of the Jewish community in North America by the end of the 20th century in an article entitled "The Vanishing American Jew." And where is Look magazine today? Even the most conservative estimate is that the U.S. Jewish population increased by over 6% between 1970 and the year 2000. These attitudes about crisis and numbers can only reinforce the negative. Why should the next generation voluntarily stay on a sinking ship? If the children of Jews intermarry with non-Jews, what would attract the children of the intermarried? If we keep on the same track, won't the choices be made to abandon even the weak forms of contemporary Jewishness? There often appears to be a sharp and unambiguous message from these sources. Return us to the good old days, when intermarriage was rare, when the home reinforced the values of Jewishness, when a Jewish language and culture filled the shops in our cultural life, when synagogue attendance and religious observance were characteristic of the many rather than the few, when our values were Jewish values, and when our families were probably wholesome and unquestionably Jewish. We do not have to be steeped in history to know that the good old days were not so good, nor do we have to be professional demographers and sociologists to understand that our contemporary communities are not about to collapse and disintegrate. My interpretation of the numbers about the survival of American Jewish communities as the 21st century begins is that some are thriving as never before, even as others are diminishing. Some are using their resources to enhance the quality of their Jewish lives and the Jewishness of the next generation, although others do not. Some segments of the Jewish community are more Jewish than ever before, even though others have melted into the pot-cold America. And new sources of strength may be emerging from what is often viewed as weakness, the intermarriages that result in Jewish commitments among those not born Jewish. Even in the stronger communities, some individuals are moving out while some are moving in. So if you look for the negative, you will find it, and you'll have some numbers to back you up. But you will miss the positive that will show you that the negative numbers have been distorted. If you look at the whole, you'll see a balance, a transformed American Jewish community that is both encouraging and challenging for the future. My view is based on an assessment of the changes that have occurred over the generations and an interpretation of the rich but complex information we now have available. It's neither optimistic nor pessimistic. It is not a question, as some have argued, of whether the glass is half full or half empty. It is a distortion when we see only half a glass, when we examine only part of the evidence and emphasize only the negative sections of our culture. Most importantly, we need to examine what's in the glass. That is, what is the quality of Jewish life? It's the contents of the glass, even more than its volume, that we need to explore and rethink. And we rarely use the information available to measure, analyze, and evaluate the quality of Jewish life. It seems that our spokespeople focus on half a glass of Jewish life without identifying its content. They focus on selected parts of our communities and small parts of our lives. They measure our current lives by a nostalgic construction of the past, which often distorts the past and misdirects the future. I want to explore together with you the interpretation of the numbers and some basis for beginning to understand the enormous transformations that have occurred to Jews to bring them where they are today. At the same time, I want us to think together as to how to tip the balance toward a richer Jewish quality for the future of a voluntary but tightly bound community. Where do we begin? I want to start on one theme that has become an obsession with Jewish communal leaders, some social scientists, many journalists, and Jewish parents: intermarriage. For a community to survive or to flourish, some attention needs to focus at the most elementary level on generational renewal. The question of the continuity of any group or community in society is, how do we ensure the continuity of that community for the people who define themselves and are defined as part of that community? An ethnic or religious group requires particular attention to generational replacement. Institutions without people become heirlooms to be examined in museums, relics of the past, interesting artifacts for the archaeologists and historians. Judaism and the Jewish religion should be living fountains, not relics of the past. For continued survival, our institutions must focus on demographic continuity. To do so requires attention to renewal. In the American context, generational renewal is anchored in the family. The family has changed so much in the last several decades that our great-grandparents and some of our grandparents and even some of our parents might not recognize it. We hardly recognize it. In the context of family and continuity, we confront what some consider to be this threatening process called intermarriage. In general, I think that the Jewish community's concern with intermarriage is misleading and misdirected. Let me explain. In the past, say 100 years ago, intermarriage was low as a rate. The phenomenon, however, was devastating. Those who intermarried in the past repudiated their religion, their families, and their communities. And their religion, their families, and their communities abandoned them. The loss was to their generation and an irrevocable loss to generations that would have come. So the obsession is understandable, but the circumstances and context in the last 30 years has changed radically. To understand the family and the impact of intermarriage, we need to appreciate the Americanness of Jews in the United States, their integration into modern American society. We focus on intermarriage between Jews and non-Jews precisely because it symbolizes the nature of Jewish and non-Jewish interaction, and by inference, the potential weakening of the community Jewishly. It directs our attention to the question of Jewish values. The issue in a voluntary community is who is a member and affiliated with the community. Being Jewish in America, being part of the community, is a question of who is in the Jewish group, not only who is the person that you marry. What is the Jewishness of the children, not only what the marriage rate is. What is the next generation, and therefore what is the continuity? In America, by and large, Jewish group membership is voluntary based on social, not a biological or a religious legal definition. It is informal, not formal group membership, but it is no less powerful. The evidence shows that most American Jews continue to be Jewish by the standards of being born into a Jewish family. But there is an increasing reality of new Jews in the United States, and being Jewish and the process of conversion to Judaism or making commitments to the community varies through the life course. Jewish identification increases as families are formed and children need to be educated. And the major source of Jewish identification for American Jews is ethnic communal, not narrowly religious. So in a real sense, the issue of intermarriage is not what the issue is. It's not marriage, but Jewishness in the family and in the household. How do people conduct their lives and raise their children, and how are they linked to their extended family and the broader community that's Jewish? And what are the facts? There's no question that there have been increases in rates of intermarriage between Jews and non-Jews in the United States. In the past, Jewish men married out more than Jewish women, and that is no longer so. Since women tend to take a more active role in the home, this was the basis for concern, but now Jewish women are marrying out, and they may want to reinforce the Jewishness of their home. The relative rates of continuity of the intermarried within the Jewish community have changed over the decade, and it's that I want to address. So what happens to the spouses, and what happens to the children? Are they always lost? And here I want to take just a few minutes for all of us to look at the chart that you picked up on your way in. And I'll do this briefly, but I thought it might be helpful if we took a second, opened up this page, and followed it with me, just as an illustration of how we have to begin thinking about the issue of intermarriage. So follow the diagram with me. It's just an exercise. It's not profound. If you know how to add, you'll follow it. And if you don't know how to add, you'll be able to follow it as well. So it's not a problem. Take a look at the first generation. The first generation on the page are 10 couples. In the first generation, half the couples are Jewish by birth. 70% of the couples are Jewish either by birth or by religious conversion. Looked at in terms of individuals, of the 15 Jews in this group, in the first generation, 10 are married to born Jews, or 66%. In this generation, there are 15 born Jews and 2 conversions to Judaism. Hence, a gain of 2 Jews. A demographic gain for the Jewish community with an individual intermarriage rate of 33%. When Jews marry persons not born Jewish, and a couple intermarriage rate of 50%. So when a third of the Jews marry non-Jews, and half the couples consist of Jews born non-Jewish, the Jewish community gains 2 additional people. And that's when conversions are 2 out of 5 of the non-Jews marrying Jews. Take a look at the second generation. There are an estimated 15 children in the second generation, assuming that each couple in the first generation has 2 children on average. These 15 Jewish children are the same number as the first generation. And therefore, there are 2 simple lessons that we should learn from this chart. High intermarriage rates of individuals and of couples may result in stability when conversions occur, and more importantly, when children are raised as Jews. Intermarriage is not a question of marriage, but Jewish homes and families. Secondly, a generational perspective is needed to identify who is raised as a Jew, and more importantly, who grows up to be Jewish and has a Jewish family. Our question, therefore, becomes, what can we do to encourage the children of Jews and to be raised Jewish, and the children of converted families and Jewish households to be Jews in a later generation. You can think about what would be the case if in that second generation, half of the intermarried children were raised as Jews rather than 1 in 6. And I've just said 1 in 6. Think about the size of the Jewish community if it was 3 out of 6. That's our challenge. And what do these patterns add up to? This is an exercise. It's fairly close to the reality, but it's an exercise. It's clear that formal conversions to Judaism is one path, but not the only path to the issue of raising Jewish children. There are large numbers of non-Jewish born persons who identify themselves as Jews, who are identified as Jews by their family, friends, and by the Jewish community without formal conversions, and who are engaged in family, communal, and organizational activities that are Jewish. There is increasing evidence that non-conversion at the time of marriage does not foreclose the possibility of conversion at a later point in time, nor does Jewish identification and practices at the time of marriage remain constant over time, over the life course. Again, it's not marriage per se or a particular religious ceremony, but the contexts of households and families that are doing things Jewishly. It's particularly important to reiterate that the Jewishness of the home is not limited to religious practices, although there are religious practices that characterize many Jewish homes. This is the case as well for the Jewishness of couples where both spouses were born Jewish. If religious observances were the only criteria, most American and Israeli Jews would not be very Jewish. Rather, family, communal, associational networks are the key indicators of Jewish continuity, and Jewish institutions are community ways to organize these networks. Even using religious affiliation, the majority of intermarried couples, including those without conversions, identify with a temple or synagogue or attend some temple services, perform some religious rituals at only slightly lower levels than are observed by born Jews married to born Jews. Thus, intermarriage and disengagement from the Jewish community are no longer synonymous. Those who intermarry are often not less attached to the Jewish community, no less Jewish in their behavior and commitments, and therefore increasing rates of intermarriage by themselves are poor indicators of the weakening quality of Jewish life. Intermarriage is not necessarily the final step towards total assimilation. In conjunction with the increasing rates of intermarriage and associated with its high levels have been the increasing acceptance of the intermarried and by Jewish families, by the secular and religious institutions of the community. Unlike in the past, the intermarried are more likely to be accepted and even welcomed by the Jewish community. Rare indeed is intermarriage greeted by sitting Shiva or reciting Kaddish. Hence, taken together, the research evidence shows that the intermarried cannot be written off as a loss to the Jewish people. Their families have not written them off. Many of their rabbis have not written them off. Their organizations have not written them off, and they have not written themselves off, although some social scientists and policymakers seem to have written them off. The increasing rate of intermarriage, therefore, does not mean erosion of the Jewish community, except through the prism of the segregated Orthodox and from the perspective of some Israeli Jews who reject the possibility of Jewish continuity outside of Israel. Intermarriage may even imply strength when significant proportions of the intermarried are actively involved in being Jewish and practicing Judaism. What intermarriage rates mean unambiguously is that the networks of Jews are touched affected and linked to the intermarriage issue, and that the proportion is larger than the percent who are intermarrying. There is hardly a Jewish household in America that has not experienced the taste of intermarriage of a family member, a neighbor, or a friend. Even those who have not been affected directly by intermarriage are therefore concerned about the shape of the Jewish community in American society. Therefore, whether intermarriage should be treated as a sign of erosion of the American Jewish community depends on the Jewish commitments of the intermarried to the Jewish community and the eventual commitments of their children. Much depends on how the Jewish community accepts and nourishes the linkages between those born Jewish and those Jewish by their identification, commitment, and conversions. A key perspective to think about is the other. What does the non-Jew see in the Jewish community as positive to relate to Jews in a positive way? Jews don't seem to think that about themselves. But it's very important to see it from the point of view of the next generation. Our young adults who've been raised with an open, positive value of family and community, who struggle with the question of what the community and the family will do in enhancing the acceptance of new family members. So while marriage may be based on individual decision-making, marriage links families, and families are the basis of community. So marriage and the formation of new families are critical for the quality of Jewish life. The evidence as a whole suggests, therefore, that the American Jewish community is continuing to survive, and I suggest to thrive as the 20th century begins. But to stress quality, we have to reorient our view to emphasize that we are not eroding and falling apart. We can strengthen our Jewish culture that's already vibrant and creative and thoroughly American. That culture has the potential to reach a wider range of people and the next generation. The next generation can relate to the community better when the community defines itself, is viewed as viable and constructive, supportive of its positive values, and generating Jewish culture and religion in its diverse forms. When we integrate our lives within our community and it becomes worthwhile, when we connect our adult children to family and to Jewish institutions, then they too can see the value of being and having a Jewish home of their own. And this is America, which is vibrant, I suggest, and growing. What about Europe after the destruction of the Holocaust? And what about Israel, the dawn of our redemption or the anchor of our future? If some American Jewish communities are surviving demographically and will grow and increase in the future, what about Europe and the European Jewish communities in the post-Holocaust period? For European communities, the full demographic consensus is one of erosion and decline, largely seen through the prism of the Holocaust and the Zionist movement. The decline in numbers and the destruction of communal institutions combined with major emigration and upheavals in Eastern Europe to result in a description of Jews in Europe since 1945 as the title of a recent book, Vanishing Diaspora. What are the most salient comparisons in Europe to make? Most of the historian and the people who study the Holocaust and demographers start from 1939. Showing the high tolls of the Holocaust and the decline in European Jewish populations. That is, of course, salient and correct. The Jewish population in Europe in 1939 was 9.6 million, and at the end of World War II in 1946 was missing 6 million Jews and was estimated at 3.9. In the mid-1990s, the European Jewish population was not over 2 million. Furthermore, the remnants of European Jewry were an older population and more assimilated. The Zionists migrated, the religious were in large part killed, and those who were willing to remain in countries and in areas that killed Jews were more secular and more assimilated. But that's not the whole story. What if we moved back in time? What if we started with 1800 and assessed the long-term trend, taking into account not just the Holocaust, but also the immigration from Eastern Europe in the 50 years up to the 1920s, the period of the 1970s and 1990s from the Soviet Union and out of the former Soviet Union. Then the picture gets a little bit more complicated. In 1800, there were 2 million Jews in all of Europe, about the same figure as in the mid-1990s. An amazing stability over 200 years. And if we take an even longer view, the Jewish population of Europe in 1700 was 719,000, which means that there's been, over a 300-year period, amazing population growth. And the switch from a European-centered Jewish culture to the cultures of America and Israel coming about through immigration of millions of Jews out of Eastern Europe at the turn of the century and millions more in the last several decades, combine that with the 6 million who were killed, places the European decline of Jews in the sunrise of North America, Australia, France, Argentina, and of course, Israel. And in recent years, the growth of the Jewish population of Germany from 30,000 to 70,000 in the last 25 years. The decline of one center or core is now being replaced by multiple centers, and that's less of an erosion where I come from and less of a decline than a transformation. And in the last 25 years, the world Jewish population, conservatively estimated, increased by 3%. Note in the process that there was a reemergence of Sephardic Jewry as an alternative rich heritage that was so silent before the beginning of the 20th century and has gained momentum in the ironic context of ethnic integration in Israeli society and in France. From the point of view of Holocaust survivors, their children and their families, from the point of view of Ashkenazic Jewry, and from the point of view of Zionism, Europe must be viewed as a decline in Jewish population. From the point of view of the religious establishment, the issues are similar in that there's been a decline in formal religious activities. And from the point of view of intermarriage, the view is the same. But there are other trends that must be discerned. There are political trends and economic trends and ethnic trends in the European context that are less indicative of erosion, that take us past the Holocaust and into a new era of relationships with the emerging centers of world Jewish life in Israel and in America. I shall, in the next set of lectures, use the evidence presented in the recent reviews of European Jewry, all of whom argue for the vanishing diaspora, to challenge the doom and gloom of this assessment of European future. It seems to me, in brief, that the end of European hegemony over world politics and economy finds its parallel in the Jewish communities there. We do not argue seriously that Europe's fall from dominance resulted in the erosion of European society or the end of vitality of European life. Rather, we consider the issue as a transformation from dominance to a new global society, where Europe takes its place in the rise of Asian countries. Surely Europe and its Jewish communities have changed in dramatic ways, but it would be an error to see Asian ascendance as removing Western European culture or politics or economy. Rather, we view the European stage as changed or transformed, and so it is with the Jews. Listen to at least one quote from a European Jewish historian, one of the eminent Jewish historians within Europe, who makes the erosion argument, and you'll see how it sounds if you read the literature and why I reject it. He says as follows, and I quote, "The prospects of European Jewry collective survival are dim. There is an end of authentic Jewish culture. Most recently, Jews in Europe face the demise like the Jews of Kaifeng, China. They will assimilate, as did the Chinese Jews. He says, the Jews of Europe now face a similar destiny. Slowly but surely they are fading away. Soon nothing will be left save a disembodied memory. What about the third pole? Those concerned about the decline in America and Europe see Israel as the great hope. Are Jews assimilating in Israel? In many ways, they are not. Jews marry other Jews, have Jewish national holidays, celebrate Jewish nationalism, observe Saturday as the Jewish Sabbath, speak a Jewish language. So marriage and ethnic and national Jewishness flourish in a country where 85% of the population is Jewish. They interact at work, in families, they socialize their children in schools and in the military, and they are cohesive by externals. Indeed, the survival of Jews in Israel seems to be guaranteed by external constraints, conflict with Arabs, and support by Western governments. Does that ensure Jewish quality? What about the quality of Jewish life in Israel? What about Jewish values of justice and of equality? Here we're somewhat less sure. Evidence of inequalities is quite powerful, as is evidence of discrimination against women, against minorities within Israel, and the ugly cultural wars between some religious Jews and Israel's secular society. And remember that only 15% of Israeli Jews attend the synagogue regularly, the same exact proportion as in the United States and in Europe. Certainly the vision of Israel as a light unto the nations has been dropped by the end of the 20th century. 150,000 guest workers from Philippines and Thailand, half the Russian immigrants are not Jewish. Half the Russian immigrants entering Israel in 1999 were not Jewish. Few share Ben-Gurion's enthusiasm when he pronounced the blessing of Shehecheyanu, thank God I live to this day, when he saw a Jewish prostitute in Tel Aviv as a symbol of normalcy. It's hard to see political corruption, economic wars and competition, mafia-like activities among our leaders in Israel as a light unto the nations. We shall raise the quality question in the next lectures as we move from covering the quantitative survival in Israel, America, and in selected parts of Europe. We are different than previous generations of Jews. The nostalgia of the past enriches the present, but the context of our lives are so different. Our grandchildren are unlikely to be comfortable with our Judaism, our Jewish institutions, our Jewish culture, since they too will be facing a new transformed world. Indeed, the challenge is to draw on the rich legacies of the past to prepare for the unknowns of the future. We cannot know the future, and I disappoint you to tell you that I'm not going to tell you what the future is. But we can learn and teach the range of options and values that can serve as our guidelines. As our children and grandchildren build new forms of Jewish expressions to meet their needs, the major challenge is to have the vision to incorporate their worlds into ours and link our world to theirs in new ways. The next generation is unlikely to be the last generation of Jews. We should see to that as our parents saw to it that their generation was not the last. We need to teach about the past through the eyes of the present, to study our distinctiveness in new and creative ways so as to guide our futures. We need new vision to adjust to the new realities of the beginning of the 21st century. The changes demand not the magic to recreate the benefits of the past without its costs, but the power of concerted community activities that involve all of us in the totality of our lives. Our strength is our institutions and our community networks. We have a powerful community. It's linked to our past and to our people. We need to find a way to attract the next generation to the quality of our lives, even as we struggle to help the current generation redefine their attachments to their Jewishness. We need to extend our hand outward to others, even as we primarily focus on ourselves. The American Jewish community, and in parts of Europe and Israel, have become strong in some ways and weak in other ways. We do not live in ideal communities. We never have. The goal is to build on our strengths, not to bemoan our weakness. Instead of asking of the numbers whether they show that Jews are surviving, let's apply the data to address the question, survival for what? How do we enhance the quality of Jewish life through our institutions and our networks? And I'll be addressing the question of quality in the next two lectures, so come and join me in that discussion. The message tonight is that there is much that needs to be done to ensure that it will be a worthwhile community so that those who have choice will choose the Jewish community. In the past, there was little choice, constrained by the environment and by fear. People had little vision of what could be because they knew little of what was. Today, we have an exceptionally wide range of choices. We, too, have made errors. We need to choose with the past as our guide, but with a vision of future possibilities, with experience as our history, but not as our constraint. Let us begin to build constructively on the strengths that we have to meet the challenges of the future. Thank you. I've said enough to provoke or irritate many of you, and I would be pleased to try to answer or avoid your questions if you come to the microphones on both sides, and so I can hear you and so that you'll be recorded for posterity, which is dangerous because now when I don't answer your questions, everybody will know about it. Go ahead.
Professor Goldschneider, welcome
Yes.
to Seattle from Berkeley.
Welcome.
When you talked about the rise of the 3% of the Jewish population, of course, that's not in comparison to the rise of the overall world population.
Yes.
So I wondered if you wish to comment about our rise relative to the rest of the population rise.
Okay, good point. The question is, that increased 3%, what about everybody else? And here, there are really two quick responses to it. You don't want all the statistics, but let me tell you the two quick responses. One, Jews have never been a majority of anything. That Jews are minority is not a new factor. That they are small, and whatever they do, if every Jew married every other Jew and they all had 10 children, they still would be a minority, right? They'd be what I call a minor error in the statistical census of the Chinese population, right? That this is a small group of people. But your question, the second part of an answer to your question is that almost all of Western countries, almost all European countries, if not all of them, and certainly the United States, has had a relative stability in their population, if not decline. Most of the populations in Europe in the last 20 years, the last 25 years, have in fact experienced declines only to increase because of immigration, of movement from Asian and African countries, which increased the United States. I can't be precise because that's really beyond what we need to do. But the population in the United States, for example, would have either been stable or maybe perhaps some decline if it weren't for the large number of immigrants that came in. Certainly that's the case in all of Europe. Almost every country of Europe, without exception, has had a reproductive rate, a fertility rate, below replacement level. And every country that increases in population is because people from other places have moved to those countries. So the Jews are not very different about that. And in fact, Israel is very much like a European country in that context. Except for the religious. Eliminate the religious within Israel, those 15 or 20%. Israel's population is exactly like a Western European country. And that has all kinds of implications, so I'll talk about it another time. But the point is, in response to that, Jews are going to be a minority for your lifetime, my lifetime, our children and grandchildren. Nothing that they do is going to change that. But the fact is that a population that's growing, for whatever reason, can't be described empirically as declining, falling apart, ending in one generation. And that's really the point. And I think that's what I would like for you to remember. Yeah.